The air raid siren wailed across the POW camp, its shrill cry cutting through the quiet Texas night. Sophia Vasquez pulled her wool cardigan tighter around her shoulders as she hurried across the compound toward the hospital ward. The summer of 1944 had brought more wounded to Camp Swift, and as one of the few nurses who spoke German, her services were in constant demand. "Miss Vasquez, we need you in Ward C," called Dr. Pearson, his white coat splattered with blood. "New prisoners from North Africa. 3 critical cases." Sophia nodded, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. At 23, she had seen more suffering than most people twice her age. The daughter of a rancher from San Antonio, she had joined the nursing corps out of patriotic duty after Pearl Harbor. Now, 2 years into her service, she no longer saw the enemy as faceless monsters from propaganda posters. They were just men, broken, bleeding men far from home. "War makes monsters of us all," her father had warned before she left. "Don't let it steal your compassion, Sophia." But compassion felt dangerous. Better to remain detached, professional. Emotions had no place in war. She reminded herself of this as she pushed through the doors into Ward C, where 3 new German officers lay on stretchers, their uniforms cut away, wounds exposed beneath harsh electric lights. The first was unconscious, chest heavily bandaged. The second moaned softly, eyes glazed with morphine. The third, tall, blond, with a blooded bandage around his temple, watched her approach with clear blue eyes that seemed to hold no hatred, only a profound weariness. "Ich bin Oberleutnant Otto Neumann," he said in a voice rough from thirst. "I require no special treatment." Sophia assessed him clinically. "I'll be the judge of that, Lieutenant." She switched to German, surprising him. "Head wound, possible concussion. Any nausea? Dizziness?" His eyes widened slightly. "Your German is excellent, nurse." "Vasquez," she replied curtly. "Answer the question, please." "Some dizziness." "Nothing serious." He studied her face. "You're not what I expected in an American prison camp." "And what did you expect, Lieutenant Neumann?" "Less kindness, perhaps." A shadow crossed his face. "We're told Americans hate us." "I'm a nurse." "I treat patients, not uniforms," she said, though she didn't entirely believe it herself. How could she not hate them, after the newsreels of bombed London, of Pearl Harbor? Yet looking at his face, human, vulnerable, made those certainties waver. She checked his pupils, his pulse. "You'll live, Lieutenant. Though you might wish otherwise when you see the food here." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've eaten Russian rations, Nurse Vasquez. I doubt yours could be worse." Something in his manner, dignity without arrogance, unsettled her. This wasn't the Nazi monster from propaganda posters. This was a man who quoted Goethe as she stitched his temple, who thanked her in flawless English, who looked at her not as enemy but as fellow human being caught in war's machinery. "Why did you join?" she asked suddenly, surprising herself. He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "For Germany," he finally said. "Not for Hitler. There's a difference many Americans don't understand." "Is there?" she challenged. "My father fought in the Great War. He raised me to believe in duty, honor. By the time I realized what we'd become..." His voice trailed off. It was too late. Before she could respond, the ward doors burst open and Major Lancaster strode in, his face flushed with anger. "Nurse Vasquez, why is this prisoner not secured? Regulations state all German officers must be restrained during treatment. He has a head injury, sir. I needed to monitor, I don't care if he's half dead." Strap him down or I'll find someone who will. Lancaster glared at Otto. Don't forget what these people are capable of. After Lancaster left, Sophia reluctantly secured the leather restraints around Otto's wrists. I'm sorry, she murmured. Don't be, he said softly. Your major isn't entirely wrong about what my country has done. His honesty disarmed her more than any protest could have. She finished her rounds and left the ward, trying to recapture her certainty that emotional distance was the only way to survive this war. But Otto Neumann's clear blue gaze had already breached her carefully constructed walls. 3 days later, she found him sitting up in bed, a book of English poetry open on his lap. Keats, she asked, checking his chart. A gift from Dr. Ellison. He thought it might improve my English. Otto marked his place with a finger. Though I find I need a dictionary for every third word. I have one in my quarters. I could bring it tomorrow. That would be kind. His gaze lingered on her face. You know, in Germany, you'd be considered, he stopped himself. Considered what? A flush crept up his neck. Beautiful, he said simply. Though perhaps it's inappropriate to say so. She should have reprimanded him, maintained professional distance. Instead, she felt warmth bloom in her chest. Very inappropriate, Lieutenant. Especially since you're still my patient. The slight emphasis on still hung between them, unacknowledged. The next morning, she brought not only a dictionary but also a German translation of Hemingway she'd found in the camp library. Their fingers brushed as she handed it to him, a touch that lasted barely a second but sent electricity through her veins. Dank, he said softly. Then, noticing her tired eyes, you look exhausted, Nurse Vasquez. New casualties arrived last night. American boys from Italy. His face sobered. I'm sorry. You're sorry American soldiers were wounded. I'm sorry anyone was wounded. He hesitated. This war has made us forget we're all human first. Over the next weeks, as summer heat shimmered across the Texas plains, Sophia found herself lingering in Ward C. Otto was recovering well, helping to translate for other German patients, even assisting the medical staff when shorthand. His education as an engineer before the war made him resourceful, his calm manner soothing to wounded men from both sides. They spoke of books, of music, of the world before war. Never politics, never the fighting. It was as if they created a neutral territory in their conversations, a no-man's land where nationality fell away. My family has a ranch outside San Antonio, she told him one quiet evening as she changed his bandages. When I was a girl, I used to ride for hours through mesquite and oak, imagining I was discovering new lands. In Bavaria, where I grew up, there are mountains so beautiful they make your heart ache, he replied. After this is over, I'd like to climb them again. See if they still exist beyond all this destruction. The casual mention of laughter hung between them. After the war. After they would no longer be nurse and prisoner, American and German, but just Sophia and Otto. You'll go back to Germany, she asked, trying to keep her voice neutral. If there's anything left to return to. His eyes met hers. And you? Back to your ranch. I don't know anymore. The world feels too big now to go back to where I started. A week later, Dr. Ellison declared Otto fit enough to join the general prisoner population. Sophia walked him to the door of the ward, protocol requiring a guard to escort him to the barracks. Thank you, Otto said formally, standing straighter than he had in weeks. For your care. It was my duty, she replied, equally formal. The guard approached, rifle slung over his shoulder. Otto hesitated, then extended his hand. Against all protocol, against her better judgment, she took it. His palm was warm, his grip firm, and in that brief touch was everything they couldn't say. Auf Wiedersehen, Nurse Vasquez. Goodbye, Lieutenant Neumann. But it wasn't goodbye. 2 nights later, while sorting medical supplies in the storage room, she turned to find Otto standing in the doorway, a guard beside him. Private Miller says you requested assistance with inventory, Otto said carefully. Miller, a kind-faced Midwestern boy barely 20, nodded. Thought the Kraut, the lieutenant here might help organize them German medical labels. It was a transparent excuse, one that could cost them all dearly if discovered. Yet Sophia found herself saying, "Yes, thank you, Private. I'll return the lieutenant in 1 hour." When Miller left, closing the door behind him, they stood in silence, surrounded by bandages and medicine bottles. "This is dangerous," she said finally. "Yes." Otto took a step closer. "But I couldn't," he struggled for words. "In 3 days, my group is being transferred north. I needed to see you once more. Otto, I know there can be nothing between us. I am the enemy. I represent everything you're fighting against." "Do you?" she whispered. "Because I don't see an enemy when I look at you. And that terrifies me." He closed the distance between them, one hand gently touching her cheek. "What do you see?" "A man," she said. "Just a man." When he kissed her, it felt like crossing a forbidden border, like breaking a sacred oath. Yet nothing in her life had ever felt more right than the gentle pressure of his lips against hers, the warmth of his hands cupping her face as if she were something precious, something to be cherished even in war's wasteland. They met 5 more times before his transfer, stolen moments in the supply room, once in the empty chapel, once behind the hospital during an air raid drill when the entire camp huddled in bunkers. Each time, the risk grew greater. Each time, the thought of never seeing him again made the danger worthless by comparison. "I've never believed in fate," Otto told her during their last meeting, his fingers intertwined with hers. "But meeting you, here of all places, it makes me wonder. What will happen after?" she dared to ask. "When the war ends." "I'll find you," he promised. "However long it takes, whatever I must do. I'll find my way back to you." The morning of his transfer, she slipped him a small package, a book of Keats with her address written inside, a letter tucked between its pages. He pressed something into her hand in return, his iron cross, removed from his uniform. "Not as a symbol of Germany," he explained, seeing her hesitation. "But as a promise. I will return for this." 2 weeks after Otto's transfer, Major Lancaster summoned Sophia to his office. On his desk lay a familiar book of poetry and a half-dozen letters, some in her handwriting, some in Otto's careful script. "These were discovered during a routine inspection," Lancaster said coldly. "Do you know what happens to women who fraternize with the enemy, Nurse Vasquez?" She stood at attention, chin high despite the fear coursing through her. "Yes, sir. These letters speak of meetings, of plans for after the war." He held up one sheet. "This one contains what appears to be wedding vows, written in German. Would you care to explain?" "No, sir. No explanation for treason. It isn't treason to recognize humanity in another person, sir." Lancaster's face darkened. "You're relieved of duty, effective immediately. Military police will escort you to your quarters, where you'll remain until your court-martial." And Lieutenant Neumann? Already in military detention awaiting his own hearing. Officers who fraternize with enemy personnel face severe consequences. She thought of Otto in a cell, alone, perhaps believing she'd betrayed him. "May I write to him?" Lancaster's laugh was without humor. "You're in no position to make requests, Nurse Vasquez." For 2 weeks, Sophia remained under house arrest in her quarters, allowed out only for meals under guard. The other nurses avoided her eyes. The doctors who once praised her skills now passed without acknowledgement. Only Dr. Ellison stopped once to whisper, "He's alive." "That's all I can say." Those words sustained her through the isolation, through the preliminary hearings where stern-faced officers read her letters aloud as evidence, through the nights when she clutched Otto's iron cross and wondered if she'd ever see him again. Then came Pearl Harbor Day, December 7, 1944, exactly 3 years after the attack that had drawn America into war. The camp held a memorial service, and Sophia was permitted to attend under guard. As the chaplain spoke of sacrifice and duty, she noticed Dr. Ellison moving toward her through the crowd. "There's news," he murmured as he passed. "Meet me at the hospital storage room at midnight. Private Miller will help." That night, heart-pounding, she slipped past the guard dozing outside her door and made her way through shadows to the hospital. Miller stood watch while she entered the darkened storage room where Ellison waited with a military telegram. "Otto's case has attracted attention in Washington," Ellison explained. "His engineering background and his willingness to provide intelligence about German technology have made him valuable. They're offering him a deal, work with American scientists for the duration, and afterward." "Afterward what?" she pressed. "Citizenship. A new start." Ellison held out the telegram. "He refused to accept unless they included you in the arrangement." She read the official text with disbelief. The charges against her would be dropped. She would be honorably discharged but required to sign a confidentiality agreement. She and Otto would be relocated to a research facility in New Mexico, where he would work under supervision until the war's end. "Is this real?" she whispered. "Very." "You leave tomorrow?" Ellison smiled. "It seems your lieutenant made quite an impression with his knowledge of German rocket technology. Important enough to overlook a wartime romance." "But why would they?" "Because we're winning this war, Sophia. And smart men are already thinking about the next one. German scientists are valuable commodities now." The next morning, 2 plainclothes agents escorted her to an unmarked car. They drove for hours through the Texas landscape she loved, heading west into New Mexico's desert expanses. Finally, they arrived at a cluster of buildings surrounded by fence and guard towers. "This is where you'll live for now," one agent explained. "Restricted movement, but better than a cell." They led her to a small house at the edge of the compound. When the door opened, Otto stood there, thinner, paler, but alive. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, unable to believe this miracle. Then she was in his arms, his face buried in her hair, his voice murmuring her name like a prayer. Behind them, the agents discreetly withdrew. "I thought I'd lost you," she whispered against his chest. "Never." He pulled back to look at her. "I told them I wouldn't help unless they brought you here. That my knowledge came with one condition. Your freedom for mine." "Our freedom together," he corrected. "It isn't perfect. We'll be watched. I'll be working for your military. But when the war ends..." "When the war ends," she prompted. He took her hands in his. "When the war ends, we'll be married properly. Not just in letters they discovered, but in reality. If you still want that." "I want that more than anything." That night, they sat on the small porch of their government-assigned house, watching stars appear over the New Mexico desert. The war still raged across oceans, men still died on distant shores, but here, in this strange limbo between captivity and freedom, they had found something precious. "Do you remember what you wrote in your last letter?" Otto asked, his arm around her shoulders. About how love doesn't recognize borders drawn by men. Sophia nodded. I believed it then. I believe it even more now. I once thought duty was following orders without question, he said quietly. Now I understand it's something deeper, being true to what's most human in us, even when the world has gone mad. She leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. We'll have to build a new life from scratch after this. We already are. He kissed her forehead. One day at a time. 6 months later, as spring bloomed across the desert, news came of Hitler's suicide, then Germany's surrender. The compound erupted in celebration, American scientists embracing their German colleagues, guards shaking hands with former prisoners. Amid the jubilation, Otto took Sophia's hand and led her to the chapel that served the research facility. The chaplain was waiting with Private Miller, now Sergeant Miller, who had been transferred to the security detail. I thought we'd wait until we could do this properly, Sophia said, surprised. Otto smiled. Haven't we waited long enough? With Miller and Dr. Ellison, who'd also been transferred to the facility, as witnesses, they exchanged their vows. Not whispered across enemy lines or written in secret letters, but spoken aloud under New Mexico's endless sky. I promised I would find my way back to you, Otto said as he slipped a simple gold band on her finger. And now I promise to never leave. In August 1945, as news of Japan's surrender filled the airwaves, Otto and Sophia Neumann stood on the porch of their small house, listening to the celebrations across the compound. It's over, Sophia whispered. Really over? Otto nodded, his arm around her waist. Now we find out who we are in peace. 2 weeks later, they received their papers, Otto's conditional citizenship, Sophia's honorable discharge, and permission to leave the facility. They packed their few belongings, including the Book of Keats and the letters that had nearly destroyed them. Where should we go? Otto asked as they loaded their car. Sophia thought of her family's ranch, of the letter her father had sent after learning of her marriage, cautious but not rejecting. She thought of Otto's dreams of mountains and her childhood fantasies of discovering new lands. Home first, she decided. To meet my family. Then, everywhere. The whole world that's been torn apart, I want to see it healing. As they drove away from the compound, the guard waved them through the gate one last time. Ahead stretched the open road and all the possibilities of peace. Ich lieb dich, Otto said, reaching for her hand across the seat. I love you too, Sophia replied, her wedding ring catching the sunlight as America spread before them, not as conqueror and conquered, but as man and woman who had found each other across the abyss of war.